channels are now connected per restream. right, folks, we're getting ready to do a show for all of those who are watching on Facebook and Twitch and YouTube. We're coming at you. We're coming at you, baby. Couple of minutes, I'll be with you.
You can get The Answer on FM 93.7, always on AM 860, online at theanswertampa.com, and depending on where you are, on FM 93.7.
This is Captain Matt Bruce, and I know there's plenty going on here in America that needs fixing. But right now, we should also take a notice of a situation happening in Lebanon, where there's currently a huge influx of 2 million Syrian refugees. The UN is calling it the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. Did you know that 82% of Lebanon's population is living in poverty this holiday season? That's why I'm asking for you to consider donating to Heart for Lebanon. It's an organization dedicated to helping those in extreme need in that part of the world. They help these people through aid and education. Working closely with local churches in the region, we can tell you now that Heart for Lebanon is a very well-run organization, and their efforts provide real solutions to those in need, who may otherwise turn to more radical elements in that region, some that are not friendly to America. Let's lift up these refugees by calling 888-444-8068 or click on the banner at our website at theanswertampa.com.
Charlie Kirk believes we're seeing the decline of America.
Right now, there are hundreds of people that run your country, run our military, run our government, that are kind of like, what's the big deal if we lose? Who cares if it's humiliating? What's important is whether or not we get paid. What's important is whether or not my child goes to Harvard. I mean, we do that all the time. That's all we've done is lose over the last 30 years. And we get promoted while doing it.
The Charlie Kirk Podcast, available on SalemPodcastNetwork.com and everywhere podcasts are heard. AM 860, The Answer. Online at theanswertampa.com. Odyssey. Here is your exclusive AccuWeather forecast.
Well, patchy fog early, then rather cloudy with a passing shower. High today 82, partly cloudy tonight with a low of 66. Then tomorrow, sunshine and some clouds and a high of 81. Clear to partly cloudy Monday night, low 67, mostly sunny Tuesday. That's your AccuWeather forecast. I'm Holly Holdren for AM 860, The Answer.
And I'm on. This is Dr. Bill, your radio MD. Thought you were going to play some of the vocals, Ken.
Well, you know what? I can if you want to sit, and we'll listen.
Well, that's that. We'll at the break started at 20 seconds into the music. All right, so we're going to do a show today. I'm Dr. Bill, your radio MD, coming at you on AM 860 The Answer and something or another FM, and we're also streaming on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch, and I think I have that all reconnected, and I apologize. I'm still learning a few things about streaming on social media, Ken. And,
Well, Doc, you're sounding real good today, let me tell you. So I think you got a handle on it.
well, thank you, and I think that you guys have tweaked a few things at your end, and then Joe's going to come over and look at my equipment too. So we'll get it all straightened out, and we'll have the wonderful show that we've always had. So,
Well, let's jump in there. What do we got today, Doc?
hey, did you hear about the tornado in Kentucky?
I did. Yes, terrible. It's the one you went like 200 miles, correct?
Yeah, and
On the ground.
they
Ugh.
think at least 70 people are dead. I guess there was a factory that people were working the night shift or the evening shift, and the roof caved in, and so they're trying to dig out people now. It's tornadoes are really potent. I've lived through one. The one went down the street right next to mine when I was a medical student, and I woke up to my windows exploding and trees falling over in my yard, and not little trees either. I mean, big, 50-year-old oaks and elms or whatever we had it back then. I can't remember. It was something to see.
I lived in Illinois, which is had one the other night. They took out an Amazon warehouse in Illinois.
That's horrible.
The other night. Yeah.
I mean, I want my stuff. Listen, I don't care about a candle factory. No, I care. I'm just teasing. But that's too bad. At any rate, so you think that's deadly. On March 18th, 1925, the deadliest tornado struck Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, killing at least 695 people. 2,000 were injured, and 15,000 homes were destroyed. Then in 1936, in Tupelo, Mississippi, 216 people were killed. And the following day, the city of Gainesville, Georgia, it killed 203 people. And then in 2011, you probably remember this, in Joplin, Missouri. You remember that, Ken?
Yep. Yes, I do.
It killed 161 people. These small towns, they'll be devastated. They'll be wiped out.
It also depends on when it hits. I mean, if it hits at night, you're going to have more death and more injury.
Well, the odd thing about the tornado that hit Louisville, and I mean, it did a lot of destruction. Hundreds and hundreds of homes maybe 1,000 homes were destroyed. There was only one death, and it was an old man with a heart attack. But it happened right before rush hour and right before school was out. So I don't know. It was a fortunate thing that we didn't have major death from that. But
They're nothing to be played with. If you're ever in a tornado warning, get yourself to some shelter.
Yeah, get to
immediately.
Shelter, get low, and if you can't get to a shelter, if you're on the interstate, get to an underpass. Stay down low, get in a ditch. And if you're at home, like in Florida, we don't have any basements in this part of Florida, so what are you going to do? I would say go inside of the lowest part of the house where you have the most structural support, like doorways and closets inside the house, that sort of thing.
Any interior room, I've always heard, is a good idea. Especially a bathroom. It has a lot of, like you said, a lot of piping around it and things like that. So.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of structural support. So the problem is if you're on the bottom floor in Florida and the house caves in on you, it may take a while to dig out. But I guess the other thing you can do is just run out in the backyard and get down in a ditch.
not the best solution. Get in the car and try and race it.
Yeah, well, you could do that. Or you could chase it. You'll probably go the opposite way from it, though.
Yeah. Storm chasers are a fascinating breed of people. They actually like to drive into those storms. So.
Yes, they do. And, I used to love storms and love chasing them and all that, but I'm getting a little old for that. Now,
one of the things I always thought was interesting back when in my Illinois days, I would there'd be a tornado warning, and you'd go outside for a second and take a look around. You see the whole neighborhood out looking for the tornado. What are you doing out here, people? Then they look at you and say, "What are you doing out here?"
It's very confusing because the roar from it roar, R-O-A-R, roar, sounds like a freight train coming. But I mean, only 100 decibels more. And,
yes.
It's very confusing. I was so disoriented. My windows blew in. It cut my leg. My waterbed, that was back in the days of waterbeds in 1973, it was decimated. Everything in my room, plants, books, everything, just gone. I mean, just sucked right out.
You're lucky to be here. You were very close.
And I went downstairs, and I couldn't think because I couldn't hear, and I was real disoriented, and also had I was getting over infectious mononucleosis, and so I wasn't feeling well to begin with. And I opened the front door, and the screen opened out, and it flew away. And trees in the front yard.
Starting to sound like the Wizard of Oz here, Doc.
And all of a sudden, it quieted down, and people were screaming. And I went outside, and somebody said, "Are you okay? You're bleeding." And I looked down, and my leg was cut, but it wasn't bad. But it was fascinating to see. I mean, those things, they just plow through. There was one neighborhood of 100 new homes, and so the landscaping had not matured. And, the mature landscaping, the big trees actually protected a lot of the older neighborhoods in Louisville as it went through. It blew up and flattened every house in that neighborhood. And they were two-story brick. They were upper middle class homes. Every single house was flat. It was something to see. It was something.
They are scary. Yeah, they're very scary.
They're scary. All right, so we don't have too many in Florida, but we do have hurricanes. Remember, in the hurricanes, what does a lot of the damage are the tornadoes that spin off. The main damage is water damage, but the wind, the tornadoes are really a big problem, and you don't even know they're there because you can't hear anything because of the roar of the hurricane. But that's a big problem, Ken.
We have lots of trailer camps around here. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
and they're not a lot of places for them to go.
And they're easily devastated. I mean,
yes,
they're tin cans. Which are okay 99% of the time. And in a temperate climate like this or a warm climate like this, you really don't need a whole lot more than that to have a comfortable home in Florida. And a lot of people come down here from Canada and rent or own trailers, mobile homes, whatever you want to call them, manufactured homes. And they're very happy. They're very happy with what they have. They can enjoy the warm weather and all the attractions of being in the Tampa-St. Petersburg area, southern Florida, central southern Florida area. And it's a great thing. And by the way, we welcome them back. The Canadians are starting to trickle in. Thank you, Canada. Oh, Canada.
Well, the problem with mobile homes is during a tornado they get very mobile.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, we moved the other day. Yeah, the parking brakes came off our mobile home. So.
Oh.
We moved 10 feet. Did you hear about this guy down in New Zealand? He was hard up for money, so people were paying him to go take the COVID vaccine for them, and he'd take their card in and pretend to be them and get them stamped and then give it back to him. So he got 10 vaccines in one day.
How is he doing?
Well, we haven't heard yet, but I'm thinking he's pretty sick this week. That's from the New Zealand Herald, and the vaccinologist and associate professor Helen Petosis Harris called the behavior unbelievably selfish. Yes, it is, and taking advantage of someone who needs the money. Of course, the person who needed the money, they're just a victim here.
Yeah. What would that do to his immunity? I mean, his immune system, would it just give him just unbelievable protection, or?
Well, I think his antibody levels are going to be very high. You'll reach a point of saturation, I'm sure, where you're not going to stimulate any more antibody response. But I would guess that he had a pretty healthy antibody response, so I'm guessing he's pretty sick this week.
Okay, well.
And then
let's hope that's not a trend starting, people taking shots for other people.
Well, I mean, you don't have to do that. In the United States, you can buy a card online, bootlegged, and fill it out yourself. Who's going to know?
Well, that'll get you suspended in the NFL, so watch yourself.
Well, yeah, but, you go to a foreign country or an airline or whatever, and you just whip out that card, and they don't even look at it. They just see you have a white card that says CDC on it, and they're like, go.
Yeah, sure.
So, it's not like New Zealand where you have, 2 million people. We've got that in Pinellas County and Pasco County, for God's sakes. New Zealand's a very small population relative to ours. So when you have 330, 340 million people, and you're processing hundreds of thousands airplane flights every day, hundreds of thousands of people moving through airports, who's going to stop and take the time to look at every card and study it? Nobody.
Nobody. You're right.
Nobody. So at any rate, now with the Omicron, which seems to be, or we hope it's going to be a blessing that it will infect a lot of people who are unvaccinated, but in Israel, a lot of the people who are catching it have been vaccinated. However, the study coming out of Israel right now says that if you're fully vaccinated, and by the way, that means the third booster or the third shot, the booster, then you're not going to get sick with Omicron. You may catch it and have a little cold, but that's about it. And if you've had the alpha, beta, gamma, or delta virus and you get a booster shot, then you're also well protected, perhaps even higher antibody levels. So that's good news. I think the other aspect of this, Ken, is that, and for all of you guys out there who are listening, is that if this virus spreads, especially through vaccinated areas like sub-Saharan Africa and rural parts of the United States and some of the Western countries, Western states that have been adverse to vaccination, then it's probably going to act as a natural vaccination, of course, and people aren't getting that sick, so we shouldn't have a big increase in hospitalizations. We haven't seen that so far at our little hospital, St. Pete General. I'm sure that there are a few drifting in, and I've seen a few people in the hallway being wheeled by and everybody yelling, "Get out of the way, get out of the way, COVID positive, COVID positive." I'm like, I don't care. I've had 3 shots. I'm going to get a 4th. I'll take a little Omicron. That, builds your immunity, right?
Sure, why not, Doc?
Why not?
The more the merrier.
The more antibodies, the better, the merrier.
Exactly.
So,
oh, well.
This study coming out of Jerusalem, it looks very hopeful and it sounds really good. So, that's the Pfizer vaccine, the BioNTech Pfizer. The Moderna is the exact same thing. And these stupid people in the press, they say, well, we have to wait and see what the Moderna is going to show. It shows the same thing. Get over it. They're both the exact same little snippet of messenger RNA. And, people just do not want to believe that. Some people think, well, I'll have to have Pfizer because I had Pfizer. No, you don't. And we've been giving our patients Moderna. We had the Pfizer, but it's so hard to keep, and it goes bad so quickly, Ken. It loses its potency even in.
Is that the one that has to be kept around 80 below or whatever?
Yeah, 80, and we've got the freezer 80 below, but it has a shelf life of, I don't know, maybe a month in the freezer and then another week in the refrigerator or whatever. But at any rate, the wife's all in a snitch. She says, no more Pfizer, no more Pfizer. It's just going to waste. And when you order it, you get 1,400 doses.
1,400?
That's the smallest amount you can get. And it's a tray, I would say it's a 10 by 10 or 12 by 12 tray, just one tray, and it's got these little vials, little itty bitty vials of the vaccine, and you have to reconstitute it with some normal saline, and there's six doses in each vial. So you've got a tray of 6 into 12 goes 2,200 times.
Nobody said to be math here today, Doc.
Yeah, so you got 200 of these little vials in here, and you end up throwing most of it away.
Well, that's sad.
Well, it is, but like we've said all along, there's just no way you can ship this stuff to sub-Saharan Africa and expect it to be stored and distributed and adequately utilized. There just isn't the infrastructure there. Plus, who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for the airplane? Who's going to pay for the freezers to be set up? Who's going to pay the vaccination companies? Because, our government's paying Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson. They're buying those doses from the pharmaceutical companies. So, in a sense, the pharmaceutical companies are being subsidized. And if the sub-Saharan countries don't have the infrastructure, even if they have the money to buy it, which, of course, they would have to put up something, then they're not going to get it because it's going to go to waste. So what are you going to do?
What about the Johnson and Johnson? We don't hear anything about Johnson and Johnson anymore.
Well, it's not quite as effective in stimulating an antibody response as the pure messenger RNA vaccines, the Moderna and the Pfizer, which we developed in the United States, and that's our technology. And of course, the world would love to have that, and we're like, well, fine, you got to chip in some cash here, guys, because this stuff isn't developed without paying people to do it and purchasing equipment and manufacturing costs and so on and so forth. It's a big deal. To bring something like this to market is $1 billion easily.
So pony up some dough.
Yeah, throw in some dough. And, you say, well, there are poor countries in sub-Saharan Africa that can't afford it. Well, most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa now, or at least the heavily populated ones, are doing pretty well. Nigeria's got oil. Botswana's got minerals. South Africa's doing okay. I mean, Kenya's fine. A lot of these countries are doing fine. They can afford to put in the infrastructure. But they got to do that first and then talk about purchasing. They can work out a deal. I'll help them. I'll broker it for them.
Well, maybe they're waiting for the U.S. to say, well, we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it.
Well, and that may be one of the functions that we have to consider as the big boy on the block in the world, and
just for the good of all mankind, kind of thing,
Yeah, I think that the public has to, what we do has to flow over into the public domain, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, Ken, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later. We have a responsibility as the big boy to stay involved, and not to pull out of Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam. It's our duty to stay where we are because we are the big boy and we provide the balance to the world that it needs to maintain socioeconomic stability. I mean, we have to do this. This is not. This is not. Well, we're gonna step back and let China take over. No, that won't work. The Chinese have a lot of problems, and they're going to struggle to get to be number one. And if they do, they're not going to hold on to it for very long because of their internal problems and their mindset and the way they look at the world. Look at us. We have allies all over the globe. I mean, we are the empire that the sun never sets on, so to speak. Whether it's Western Europe, Northern African countries, Middle Eastern countries, the Arabian Peninsula, Pakistan off and on, India kind of, sort of, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines. I mean, you go around the globe and there's Canada, England. I mean, there's just nowhere in the world you can go where we aren't partnered up with somebody, both economically through trade and militarily through pacts and agreements. And Ken, if we ignore these and let these slide, then we are remiss. We're irresponsible. And you say, well, I don't want to see my son go to war. Well, you know what? It's horrible to have a family member die. There's no doubt about it. But we have to make sacrifices in order to maintain our own democracy and our own stability. We just got
that's why strong deterrents are so important.
That's exactly right. And my sisters are like, oh, Trump's going to get us into a war. I said, no, he's going to keep us out of a war because he's going to get us stronger, and then people won't want to mess with us. So now look what's happening. We've got a weak-looking president and a weak-looking administration that's decreased funding to the military. And so all of a sudden, guess who's on the Ukrainian border? The Russians. Guess who's knocking on Taiwan's door? The Chinese mainland. That's not an accident. These things happen because a big country like ours, who is the hegemon in the world and has a responsibility to maintain order and also to maintain economic stability and to share with the world our socioeconomic welfare benefits, like if you believe in climate change and going green. I mean, that's something that will benefit the whole world. When we go green, the whole world is better off. And I don't know if there's a real climate change problem or not, if you want to look at a December tornado, maybe you've got an argument there. But regardless of that, at some point we're going to have to shift from carbon fuel to other sources of fuel. And I've been saying that for 50, 60 years now, since I was in junior high school. And that's a fact, Jack.
You're a smart kid.
Well, I'm just hyperactive, I think.
Well, exactly. Someday we're going to do that, but I'm not sure any of the technologies we have right now are really going to facilitate that much. It just seems too expensive to put up all these chargers, and everybody's got to get a new car. I was watching something on the internet the other day. A guy who owns an electric car drove across country from one charger to another charger. He had to map out his entire vacation to make sure he didn't run out of charging. And at the end of it, he said his best advice is to make sure you've got another car that uses gasoline.
Well,
because this is not good for long trips, was his advice.
That's true. Right now, I don't think it is good for long trips, but I don't think the government stepping in and building stations is the answer either. Like Elon Musk said, private industry can do it better, more efficiently, and more up to date. You know, the government's going to be slow. It's going to be fraught with all kinds of regulations and red tape, and it's going to cost 2 to 3 times as much for the public to put up all of these charging stations as it is for private industry. Ultimately, we're all going to pay for it, either through taxes or through private charging stations where you have to pull out your credit card and stick it in the machine. And, of course, the rapidity of the chargers is how quickly they can charge a car is going to be one of the factors. So if you can charge your car in an hour, that's a lot different than if it's going to take overnight. So it depends on the amperage and the car's setup. And these things are going to get better. And remember, gasoline in the late 19th century when the gas engine was developed. Remember Benz and all those guys back in the 1870s and 80s? They actually developed and Olds, they developed the internal combustion engine using gasoline. And it took, from the time that they started working on this, it took another 20, 30, 40 years before there was a widespread usage of gasoline cars. And people...
Well, it was a natural growth.
And it's going to be a natural growth with electric cars. But we got to, like you say, we have to work out a better mechanism for producing electricity, because right now most of the world is still using carbon fuel to generate electricity in their plants. We still are using carbon fuel. We're using natural gas. That's become a big source of power for our power plants. We're still at about 30 to 40% coal, and we've got nuclear, but for the life of me, I don't know why the press is so afraid of it. And and of course, the politicians, they don't understand it. They don't know what it's about. But really, that would be the salvation. However, it takes a long time to go through all the regulatory processes. We could build the reactors pretty quickly, but it's all the damn regulatory stuff that slows everything down, and they take years to build.
And on the other side, what do you do with the spent fuel? That's always been a problem as well.
It's really not that big of a mass, and you can actually entomb it right on site, or you can drill down into the core. And what you do is you encase it in glass or porcelain, and then you drop it down into the bedrock and seal it up and put a bunch of warning signs around it that hopefully will last a few thousand years. But, you know, you and I aren't going to be around then, so let somebody else worry about that. It's like the garbage piles from 2,000 years ago. They're like, who cares? Let them worry about it. And now we're having fun digging through it and seeing what they were up to, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, we're just not there yet with electricity on as far as production end, and I agree with you 100%. We need to use more nuclear. The fusion fission thing is starting to have some movement now as well. I'm seeing a lot of more fusion stories coming out.
Yeah, and it looks like for the first time a group in South Korea has been able to produce more energy from a small fusion reaction than they needed than was consumed by the reaction, because remember, you have to get this thing started. So in order to get it started, you have to superheat and supercompress these helium and hydrogen atoms to make them join together. And so right now we're using hydrogen and hydrogen because helium-3 is so rare in our atmosphere, but there's a ton of it on the moon. So that's what Elon Musk wants to do, and the Chinese, they want to go up there and mine the moon, which is fine with me. You know, bring a little dust back, what the heck. And but you know, they produced enough energy that instantaneously could drive 5 or 10 hair dryers. So it wasn't a huge amount of energy, but it was a first step. They used a gold containment field, and you have to suspend these things with super magnets, and it's you know, it's a big project. And then you have to bombard these microscopic amounts of atoms with a ton of lasers, and so it's a lot of energy, and it's an instantaneous reaction too. I mean, you can't continue it. You've got to fire and then stop. And so, but
Well, we're trying to replicate a star. That's not easy. So,
well, it was a baby star. It was a little one, and it lasted probably a billionth of a second. But hey, it's a beginning.
that's right.
More energy came out than went in, and that's what we want.
We'll get there someday. Probably not in our lifetimes, but
You never know. I mean,
No.
things have been moving so fast, supercomputers and quantum computers. And by the way, there's a big fear that the Chinese are ahead of us on quantum computing. And you say, well, why is that important? Well, it's important in everything from military and defense to math and science to predicting the weather and forecasting things like these tornadoes and the paths they'll take, so you can warn people sooner than 5 minutes before it hits. And so we've got a lot of use for the quantum computers, and at some point they're going to be the state of the art. It may not be in our lifetime, although it probably will, since I said that I don't think we would see a computer that you could hold in your hand until long after I was dead. Now everybody's got a cell phone that can do all the computing that I could do on a TRS-80 back in the 1970s. So who knows, Ken? Things
Yeah.
are moving fast. They're moving fast. And speaking of moving fast, look what time it is. It's
oh my goodness, yes. Let's move on.
All right, well, let's move on and grab a cup of Joe. And I'll be right back. I am Dr. Bill, your radio MD.
With SRN News, I'm Michael Harrington in Washington. A major storm is headed into Northern California this weekend, promising to drop heavy snow in the Sierra Nevada and rain throughout the region. Forecasters say the storm is on track to hit coastal areas north of San Francisco and bring light rain, then the heavier rainfall coming in tonight in through Monday morning as the storm spreads. Pacific Gas and Electric is sending crews to clear vegetation away from power lines to reduce the chance of electricity outages. An avalanche swept through a ski area in Washington state yesterday, killing a 60-year-old man and temporarily trapping 5 others. They say that the skiers have been warned not to be in the area they were. And more than 1,000 men and women plunged into the cold waters of Hong Kong's Victoria Bay this morning, competing to see who could swim the fastest across the harbor to open water. This is SRN News.
This Dr. Bill
patchy fog early, then rather cloudy with a passing shower. High today 82, partly cloudy tonight with a low of 66. Then tomorrow, sunshine and some clouds and a high of 81. Clear to partly cloudy Monday night, low 67, mostly sunny Tuesday. That's your AccuWeather forecast. I'm Holly Holdren for AM 860, The Answer.
And I'm back. This is Dr. Bill. Little vocalization there this morning for you. I kind of like that, Ken.
That's very nice, actually. Very pleasant.
Yeah, it is. It's very upbeat and light and airy. And, of course, it's in Spanish, so I don't know what the hell she said.
Doesn't matter. It sounds good.
It still sounds good. So this out of Harvard professor Graham Allison and former Google CEO Eric Schmidt have warned that China may lead the world in decisive technology in a new report for Harvard University Belfer Center, Belfer, and the authors. This is from Asian Times. The authors warn China has become a serious competitor in the foundational technologies of the 21st century, including artificial intelligence, 5G, quantum information science, semiconductors, biotechnology, and green energy. So looks like in some races it's already become number one, and it will soon overtake the U.S. within the next decade. So this raises the question, are we going to be replaced as the world power? And should we be? Should we turn this over to the Chinese and let them be the big boy on the block? Well, as you know, Ken, the Chinese are not chipping in and doing their share in terms of providing aid and assistance to underdeveloped countries. They're doing some, but mostly they're going in and saying, we'll build you infrastructure so that we can truck in all of our goods and supplies and sell it to you. And that's quite different than what we're doing. We go in and say, we're going to help you with your infrastructure, so let's first get you sewer and water and electricity. And you know, it's a big difference. The next part of this is they're not chipping in as much as they should in terms of the international organizations. They're doing better with the UN. I think now they're number 2 in terms of coughing up cash after the United States. And that's good. You know, that's good. Here's a big problem for China, though, Ken, and you guys need to listen to this because this is important. They're surrounded by enemies. They don't have any friends in the world. They don't have alliances. They think that they can do it all by themselves, and they've been this way for thousands of years because they were a big power in the Asian continent, and they were separated from a lot of the world by the Hindu Kush Mountains and the Gobi Desert, and then you had Siberia to the north, which is a frozen wasteland, or used to be. I guess it's thawing out now. But the world has changed, Ken. The world has changed. And you guys, you got to remember now, we can say let's build more aircraft carriers, just as before World War II we were saying we can build more battleships, but we saw what happened to all our battleships, and by the second year of World War II, battleships were not being used that much. They were only being used for beach invasions, shore invasions by our
Bombardment.
troops.
Basically, they were bombardment.
They were bombardment. They were
Yes.
they were support. They were not front line. And
Yeah, the day of the dreadnought battles at sea were done by then.
they were done.
And we do that a lot. We do that constantly. I mean, if you look at what France did after World War I, they built the Maginot Line, a huge complex,
And it didn't hold.
several levels deep. And the Germans went around it in World War II because they were still fighting World War I in France.
And, you know, the English said, well, the French will stop them at the Maginot Line. And then in Singapore and Southeast Asia, the British said, well, we'll stop them because we'll beat them in the sea with battleships. And, of course, the Japanese just bombed their battleships from the air. And that was it.
Right, that was it.
That was it. You know, and then the Japanese took over the Malaysian Peninsula, and that was the end of the British involvement in that part of the world until later in the war.
Yeah.
When
You've got to think ahead. You can't just keep looking at new technology, old technologies, and saying let's build more of that, because you're going to get hit with a missile that flies at 15 times the speed of sound.
Yeah, and you know what? You cannot defend a battleship against some of these new missiles that are supersonic and coming in from above you, and not, they're coming in from up over your head because they're coming in from the upper atmosphere. And you may not, and if they're stealth, you may not know they're there until they're right on top of you. Now, with a more traditional air-to-ship or ship-to-ship missile, you can use those high-speed Gatling guns that spit out thousands of rounds a second, because they have multiple barrels, and you can eat up a missile coming in with the technology that we have with the radar technology. But you may not be able to pick these things up on radar. And if
They're moving
you do,
too fast.
it's too late. And if you do, it's too late.
Yeah.
So we're thinking, let's build more battleships, when we should be thinking more like Trump thought, and like Reagan thought, and that is, let's build a space defense system, something out there that can take out a lot of this stuff before it gets to us. And it's going to have to be even more high-tech, because you're going to have to take out smaller things than just intercontinental ballistic missiles. You're going to have to take out ship-killing missiles, which are the size of a cruise missile or smaller. That's not too big. It's a smaller target. It's moving fast. You got to have the technology to do that. Is our military doing that? The military is notoriously slow to change. You look at every war, and there was resistance to change, whether it was going from a muzzle loader to a breech loader in the Civil War, or going from a breech loader to a bolt action in World War I, or going from a bolt action in World War II to a semi-automatic, and then, of course, going from a semi-automatic to a fully automatic weapon, which was a big deal in Vietnam. And people were even upset with that, because initially the M15 rifle was jamming, so people were going back to their old M1 Garands and their M14s, which were bolt action or semi-automatics. And so there's always resistance to change, because the military guys say, well, this has been working. Why don't we just continue to use it, and we can always change later? Well, things are moving fast, Ken.
Yeah. What really concerns me is both China and Russia now have demonstrated a killer satellite capability, and I don't see us doing anything like that at all, and we should be, in my opinion.
I agree with you, and I think that if we don't get up there and protect our satellites, it's possible, not at this point, but in the near future, that they could take out all of our telecommunication satellites and all of our eyes in the sky. I mean,
our GPS system could be gone in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, we could be blind in multiple ways, both with direct vision, with infrared vision, and with radio communications, 5G. And by the way, China's beat us to 5G. Of course, we lag behind the world when it comes to technology, like the internet and Ethernet and wireless. We've lagged behind Europe in that. We've lagged behind everybody else in the developed world. We always seem to go a little bit slower, in part because, like you say, Ken, you got to go through Congress to get this done. And, they don't know what they're doing, and so they fight and debate and bicker. And, of course, you've got all the private enterprise, which is saying, wait a minute, we want you to do this because this is going to make us richer. And so then the politicians are like, well, if I don't do what this guy wants, he's not going to support me when I run for re-election. And the things I really want to do, I'm not going to be able to get done. So it's more complex than a lot of the world, because you got a representative democracy that, as far as a representative democracy goes, works fairly well. But as far as moving fast and implementing change, there's nothing like a dictator.
That's very true.
I mean, you can't get any faster than that. He says, I want you to build the V2, and I don't want you to build a nuclear weapon. And you know what? Everybody's scared. They don't want to get sent to prison or shot. They say, okay, we'll build you a V2.
Well, I'm putting my hope on lasers. I think our laser technology is probably ahead of everybody else's in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that we're getting, I think, very close to a point where we will be able to shoot down these these hyper missiles with a blast of a laser. Nothing else is fast. You can't get faster than the speed of light.
No, you can't. And this is something that our military has got to get over. You know, it's great to have our aircraft carriers in parts of the world where they can't be harmed, but come on, let's face it, the Chinese now have the ability to take out our aircraft carriers at will, anywhere. I don't think they would, and I think that they're going to have a hard time beating us if they take us on in an all-out war right now. We just are still superior, even though it looks like they're catching up quickly. They're not there yet.
And keep in mind on these hypersonic missiles, these things were tested with no interference whatsoever. No one was trying to stop them.
That's right.
And they were still 20 miles off the mark when they went to their target. So you start putting some jamming in there and a couple of people shooting at it, and we'll see how it does. But right now, don't get too fearful of these missiles because no one's tried to stop them yet. We haven't seen them in a real-world operation.
Yeah, we have not seen any real applications, and so. But I think it's important that the military remember that the thinking before World War II didn't work, and the thinking before Vietnam didn't work, and I think that we are going to have to eventually realize that we have to look ahead and not behind if we're going to be militarily number one. And you say, well, why should we be? A lot of people will say, war is awful. Let's just be a pacifist nation. That ain't going to work. We'll be taken over in no time. We just have too many resources and too much economic strength that we are a target, Ken. We are a target.
Oh, absolutely. We are the biggest target. We've got the biggest bullseye on our back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And the problem with that is that even though my sisters say we're an evil country, we're not. We're the best country on earth. And without our influence in the world, which, by the way, is wanted and welcomed almost universally, the world is going to have a hard time. And one of the economists back in the 1930s and 40s said that one of the biggest causes of the Great Depression was that the United States did not step up to take over its position as number one in the world economically after the British shrank away. And you know, there's some truth to that. I've read some of the economics of the Great Depression, and instead of the United States loosening up cash and making cheap loans to the world and working with not only our own banks but international banks, they tightened everything up. You know, they didn't know what to do, but this is why we have to look forward and not backward. If we had loosened up money when the market crashed, if we had propped up economies around the world, and we had that ability, if we had dropped our interest rates instead of raising them, and if banks had stayed open instead of running scared and trying to hang on to what money they had, the Great Depression would not have been a Great Depression. It would have been a recession.
And in turn, that may have prevented World War II. I mean, it's amazing what could have happened after that when you think about it.
It's a domino effect because guess who came out of the Great Depression first? Germany. You know why?
Yes.
Because the European central banks like Romania and other banks that had money from oil, etc., the Germans pressured them into opening up and lending them money. So they started their industries back up. They started building their Autobahn, which is their interstate, which was 2 decades before ours was started. They started to rebuild their automobile industry with the VW. And then they quietly and sneakily started to rebuild their military. So they had almost full employment in the 1930s because of the banking practices and the central banking practices of some of the bigger powers in Europe.
And people wonder, why was Hitler able to do what he did? Well, that's because he did fix the economy. To the Germans, he was a hero.
He was. And
he brought them back before anybody else.
And they, you know, you will hear Germans at that time saying, we were cheering and screaming and elated. We didn't even know what we were cheering for. We were ecstatic that we had food and clothing and shelter and jobs. And, well, you know, he was the man in power, so he's going to get the glory.
They didn't know he was a maniac, but, you know, they found that out later the hard way, unfortunately.
And, you know, the thinking at that time was that the French would be able to stop the Germans. That didn't work.
No.
And Chamberlain thought, well, if we give them the Sudetenland and a chunk of Czechoslovakia, that'll keep them quiet and they won't want to do anything else. That just made them hungrier.
Appeasement never works, and we've learned that. Appeasement never works. You have to be tough.
It does not work. You got to be tough. You can have a carrot, but you got to have a stick too.
And yeah, a really big one.
And a really big one, as Teddy Roosevelt said. And this is just craziness to try to appease these countries that are threatening and want to take over, and they're totalitarian. And, China's got a lot of problems. Totalitarianism ultimately interferes with inventions and with free thinking and with all the things that go along with it, spontaneity. And I heard this from guys who fought in World War II. They told me that one of the problems the German troops had is that they couldn't do anything without permission from headquarters.
That's right. Nobody could make a decision.
Nobody could make a decision. And they were afraid that if they did, that they would be thrown in the brig or demoted.
Or just shot on the spot.
Or shot on the spot. I don't think they would have been shot, but, they were thinking, geez, I don't want to lose my leave time. I don't want to lose my pension if I'm an officer. I don't want to. And if I'm a hired up, if I'm Rommel, a general, a field marshal, I don't want to get shot. So the Americans, they were like, well, improvise. So they didn't call back to headquarters to say, hey, can we put a rake on the front of our tank so we can get through these hedgerows, the boucage,
That's right.
You know what those are, Ken?
Yeah, this was Normandy. They actually built this that just started welding them onto tanks, the guys, the sergeants.
Did. And they didn't ask anybody's permission.
No, they just worked it. They invented something brand new, and word spread. And
they just
before you knew it, we were in the middle of
I
Germany.
think we can do this, and the captain got involved, and they called supply, and the supply sergeant, and they swapped some cigarettes and chocolate and whatever, and he sent up one of these big rakes that they put on the front of bulldozers when they want to clear land. They welded it on, and
yeah, got a bunch of farmers out there. They knew what to do. They knew how to clear it.
Yep. And the other thing is that if you have your captain killed, your lieutenant takes over. If your lieutenant's killed, the sergeant takes over. Your sergeant's killed, the corporal takes over. I mean, we just go right up the line, and somebody takes over, and everybody says, yeah, you got to. I mean, we don't have to call back to headquarters. We're in the middle of battle, and you do what you got to do.
Exactly. That's why we win. That's why we're winners.
That's why we're winners. You improvise. And we have that because we have free thinking. The Chinese don't have that in a lot of ways. They don't have the friends around the world, the alliances. They're not participating in the world order as much as we are, even though they want to take over and be part of the world order. And meanwhile, under their nose, Taiwan's building a fleet of submarines.
I didn't know till recently that Taiwan makes pretty much all of the computer chips in the world nowadays.
They do, and of course that's why the Chinese want it.
That's why we have to stop them.
Yeah, well, Intel's talking about building another plant, or they're actually starting a plant, I think, in Arizona, and that's a good thing. And we need more domestic chip making. We have developed the whole technology and shared it with the Taiwanese and the Japanese and the South Koreans, and then that idiot, what's his name, Clinton, shared it with the Chinese. And
but yeah, there was a time when we made all the chips in the world.
Yeah,
right here.
Right here. There was a time when we made most things, and I don't mind spreading the wealth around. That's okay. But we do have to think about what the ultimate outcome is of allowing a totalitarian government to become the number one power. I mean, look what happened when Germany became the number one power in Europe, a totalitarian state, and the Russians were fighting them. It's
a lot of people died.
A lot of people died, and so there's some traps that the Chinese can fall into. The Tacitus trap, and it describes a situation where no matter what the government says or does, people will consider it a lie or a bad deed. And a lot of people in China don't trust the government. They think they're crooked. They think they're not honest with the people.
2 minutes.
And they find that out. The Thucydides trap is the theory that a rising power will inevitably challenge the dominance of an existing hegemon like the United States. And I don't think the Chinese are ready to do that. They're not going to be able to take us. The Kindleberger trap was coined by Harvard professor Joseph Nye, but derived from the late economic historian Charles Kindleberger. Both the two other traps and this one highlight the danger inherent in the shifting of balance of power. What makes them different, rather, is that the focus is on the threat from a strong aspirant power. The Kindle trap, however, attributes the failure of the international system to the underprovision of global public good and goods. And that's what I'm saying, that we're still the number one supplier of that. Ken, we got to keep doing that. We can't stop. We can't back away. We got to make that sacrifice. So we've got problems, but we can overcome them. But the Chinese have a lot bigger problems than we do, my friend. I'll tell you that.
We got about a minute left here, Doc. You want to give the phone numbers or practice if people need your services?
Yeah, we've got the vaccine. We've got rapid testing if you're going on a trip for the COVID. And so we're at 727-384-6411, 727-384-6411. And by the way, we have telemedicine. You can call 727-384-6411. We have full service practice cardiology, internal medicine, general medicine. The wife does a little bit of everything. I do a little bit of everything. And of course, we see Canadians. And we love everybody, and we want you to come on in. We have great self-pay rates, Ken, if you don't have insurance or you're a Canadian.
15 seconds, Doc.
We're here for you. So come and see us, 727-384-6411, 727-384-6411. Love you guys.
See you next week.
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you for listening to Dr. Bill, your radio MD. Join Dr. Bill every Sunday morning at 9 for more insight, information, provocation, and fun. Dr. Bill Handelman practices in St. Petersburg, Florida at Bay Area Medical Can Care Clinic, 6399 38th Avenue North. For your convenience, telemedicine appointments are available. Call his office today at 727-384-6411. That's 727-384-6411. Or visit his website at cancareclinic.com.